morning, church.
Good morning.
Thank you. Oh, I like that interactive piece. That's good. That's good. Good morning. Good morning. I like interaction. So feel free to talk to me, shout stuff out. I might ask you a question. If I do, feel free to answer. I'll tell you what, I'm Methodist, and the Methodists, they're so quiet. They don't like your response. So don't be afraid. Exactly. So feel free to respond. I like that. Well, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm Seth Evans, and I live in Springfield. My wife teaches right down the street at Northwestern. I am a Methodist, so because of that, we get moved around a little bit from church to church. So right now I'm serving a church in London, Ohio, which is actually where I grew up. I'm the associate pastor, the youth pastor, the children's pastor, the adult pastor. No, I work with a little bit of everybody over there. It is a lot of fun. I really, really like it. Good. But I really appreciated that you all invited me out here today and that you all greeted me so warmly. I really feel welcome and like I'm in the family. So just thank you. Thank you for that. It really means a lot. It's really good to be hospitable, I think, and you are embodying that. So I have some good news for you. I prepared 2 sermons, and I'm going to preach them both. No, I'm just kidding. I want to give you extra. You guys buy one, get one free today. No, I'm just kidding. But I did actually prepare 2. I've got the safe sermon, and then I've got the dangerous sermon. So which one do you guys want to hear?
Danger.
Danger.
The dangerous sermon. I thought you would say that. I was kind of afraid of that. That's the one I prepared for a little bit more, so I'm kind of glad that you chose that one. So we'll do the dangerous sermon. So you might be wondering what's going to make it dangerous, and what makes it dangerous is it's about politics. Dun, dun, dun. And that's what they always tell you shouldn't talk about, right? You're not supposed to talk about religion or politics. Am I right? Yes. But guess what? We're going to talk about religion because we're in a church. That's what we're all about. And I'm not going to talk about left or right or Republican or Democrat or Green Party or any of that. I promise we're not going to talk about that. But you know what? I don't think as Christians that we should be afraid to talk about politics, at least a little bit. And this is why. Because Jesus was very political, right? I mean, he was making big changes in his world. He was talking about things that affected the Roman Empire. He was talking about things that affected the little guy, the big guy, the tax collector. He was talking about all of that. He was unafraid to make his beliefs heard and to share his good news with the world, right? So we're going to look through the lens of Christianity, through the lens of that good news of Christ. But we are going to talk about, unless you chase me out, and that's okay if you do, but we're going to talk a little bit about something that some people find to be political. But this political issue isn't an American political issue, although it is certainly something we deal with in America, but it's something that affects the entire world. And so that problem is the refugee problem. We have a refugee problem right now. Mm-hmm. And the reason we have a refugee problem isn't just because people like to be refugees, right? The real problem isn't that people are traveling from one place to another. It's that they're facing some major upheaval in their world. Do you guys feel like we're facing any upheaval here in our community or in our world right now? A little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Have you ever felt like, especially maybe it's just me, but in the last couple of years, like things feel like they're getting more and more divided and people are at each other's throats, just craziness? I feel like that a lot. And actually, I didn't bring it with me today, but I sometimes like to use charts. And I had a chart that I was showing, this was before the election, of the division that people feel. It was like a survey of thousands of people, like how much division people feel. And we are now, at this point in our history in America, more divided than we've been in the last 100 years. So I don't know if that's surprising for anybody. It's really not too surprising for me because I feel that. And I feel like the division, whether it's real or whether it's just in our minds, is so much so that we start to get afraid to talk about things that are important. Because we're afraid that that's going to be the thing that ignites the spark that's going to push us even further apart. But as Christians, we should be talking about this, and really things like refugees, we can talk about that as Christians. It's okay. It's okay to talk about it, and it's important to talk about it because it affects us, and it affects other people around the world that are God's people too. So I'm going to talk about it. Do I have your permission? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. All right, so first I'm going to just share some stats. All right, anybody a numbers person in here? Would like to hear statistics? Okay, here's some statistics. So right now in the whole world, does anybody know what's the population right now?
7 billion.
7 billion. I think it's actually 8 billion. It's about 8 billion. So you're really close. That's a lot. A billion is like an unfathomable number. It's so big. So for example, I was just talking with one of my friends the other day, and we talked about like $1 million seems like a lot of money, and $1 billion seems like a lot of money, and they seem like they're kind of close. But if you had $1 billion in your bank account right now, and if you're a billionaire, you know how to invest your money, right? You're going to get returns on that. You're going to get probably 10% or more every year just in interest if you're a billionaire, because you can afford to hire good financial planners. So if you wanted to just live on the interest of $1 billion, you'd have to, if you had to spend it all of just the interest, not the whole billion, but just the interest, you'd have to spend almost $250,000 every day just to be able to run through the interest by the end of the year. That's how much $1 billion is. We got 8 billion people. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. But here's the crazy thing. Out of that 8 billion people, 1% of them, 1% doesn't seem like very much, does it? Doesn't seem like a lot. But when you take 1% of a billion, 1% of all the people in the world right now are refugees. That's a lot of people. 1%. That equals 82 million refugees around the world. It's a lot. And that number is going up by about 4 million every single year. So we are continuing to have a refugee crisis. People are leaving. And I could go on about lots of different reasons that's happening, political strife and upheaval and all of this, and I won't do that, but I will show you here just real quick, a quick visual of, I don't know if you can see it from where you are. This is the, over the last just 10 years, the increase in refugees from 40 million to 82 million, just in the last 10 years. So that's how quickly we've seen an increase. Can you name one of the places where we're getting a lot of, we're seeing a lot of refugees right this moment? You've probably seen it all the
Haiti.
Afghanistan and Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good. They're all over. They're all over. Another one I didn't even know about, but it's been a problem for a long time, is Myanmar. You've heard of that. That's actually where we get more refugees from there than anywhere else. But there's refugees from all kinds of situations, but one of them right now that we're hearing about a lot is Afghanistan, and another one we're hearing about a lot is Haiti. And people are leaving not because they want to, but because they have to. They don't have a choice. They're being chased out by religious zealots. They're being chased out by natural disasters. There's all kinds of causes that create refugees, but it's not a good situation to be in. Now, I grew up understanding that the United States and America, that we were a country that loves to take in the people, right? We want to take people in that are suffering. Come, bring to me, you're poor and you're suffering. Here's a safe place. If you ranked all of the countries in the world, would you say, if you were just to guess, would you say that America is in the top 5 for receiving refugees around the world? Raise your hand if you think maybe we're in the top 5.
I have no idea.
Okay, well, at least the top 10.
I guess.
We're actually 18th out of all the countries in the world. We're 18th behind Germany, France, Iran, Pakistan, and China. Those are just a few to name. We're behind a lot of countries, including Iran, Pakistan, and China. That really shocked me when I read that. We take not really that many refugees. In fact, there are 64,000 people right this moment that are seeking asylum status in the United States, but we had capped our refugee entries down to 18,000. That's all we're willing to take in right now. If you go back to 1980, this is really interesting to me. Back in 1980, we were planning to take in 231,000 refugees from around the world. Now, I don't know, I was alive in 1980, but I don't remember what was happening in the world that there was some kind of crisis. But there was a crisis, and 231,000 people. And that number sharply dropped, it looks like, around 84. and it's been steadily dropping. It kind of held steady here around 70,000 for about 10 years, and then over the last 2 years it dropped down to 18,000. So now we're going to be dropping from 18th down to like 40th. We're going to be really low in terms of the number of refugees that we're willing to take. And again, I mentioned I would be political. I'm not being political on naming any names on who's making the policies on this, but the policies are made in part because of the voice of the people, right? What we decide is important as a country and as a people. So right now, the current president is talking about potentially raising that number up a little bit. But right now, at this moment, we're at a historic low. It's the lowest amount of refugees we've been willing to take in the last 30 years. So very, very low. Which is, if you compare that to the number of people seeking asylum, one number is going up and the other is going way down. So that's interesting that that's the choice that we're making right now. But I wonder, what does our faith tell us about refugees and what that means? So here's a couple other stats I want to share before I get into that. So one is that about half of all the refugees that we take in the United States are under 18. Half of them are children. About half of them are women. And about 79% of them are Christians. Does that surprise anybody that almost 80% of the refugees that we bring in currently are Christians? There's a lot of Christians seeking asylum right now. It's really interesting. In fact, we admit more Christian refugees than any other religion, and that's been held true for like the last 20 years. Since we mentioned Afghanistan, 3.5 million Afghanis had to flee their homes because of the current issues going on with the Taliban retaking the country, and 500,000 of them will become refugees and will be taken somewhere. And we're here in Ohio. You might see some of them. We have the governor of Ohio has agreed to take 855 of that 500,000 in Ohio. So you might see some, not very many, but some. You can read about that in the news. But when it comes to refugees, if you happen to find yourself as a refugee, you find yourself in good company. So we reuse this book, this holy book, with the stories of our faith. I want to name some of the refugees that you might have heard of. Have you heard of Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
They were refugees from the Garden of Eden, right? They got kicked out of paradise. They were basically refugees. You could think of it that way. How about Abraham and Sarah? Have you heard of them? Refugees in Egypt and then later in Canaan. What about Lot fleeing from Sodom? Also a refugee. Jacob and Joseph and Moses and all of the people of Israel were refugees. What about Joseph and Mary fleeing to Egypt with baby Jesus to escape when the great purge of the children happened? Almost all of our biblical heroes, in fact, all of them, if you count the whole people of Israel, are refugees. So we as Christians, stemming from that tide of refugees that are our forefathers and foremothers, are really refugees. And then our verse that we read today from Leviticus, I'd like to read that again just one more time. Hear these words. The land itself, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, says the Lord. With me, you are but aliens and tenants. So if we are God's people and we are His, the land is not ours. It's God's land. And we're all just aliens and tenants. We're all refugees here. As Christians, we are refugees. In early America, most of the people who came here, who we might be able to trace our lineage back to them, also would be considered refugees, right? They came to America to flee religious persecution, government oppression, looking for a new way of life, trying to find a better life. And in fact, the Liberty Bell itself, anybody ever visited the Liberty Bell?
I haven't.
The Liberty Bell itself has a quote from Leviticus on it, from the same section that we just read from. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land. That's on the Liberty Bell. That was actually from this, just a couple verses later, from that verse I just read. So, this refugee crisis. It's been happening for a long time, since the dawn of creation. Since the dawn of creation. And all of God's people, in some way or another, you might consider us all refugees. But for some reason, there's this weird thing happening where a lot of Americans feel like it doesn't concern us and it shouldn't concern us. That this issue about refugees is, we don't want them here, we don't need them here, they're just going to cause problems. And we forget that we really are refugees ourselves. So, what does Jesus say about this? What does the Bible say about refugees? I'd like to read a few passages that I find pretty interesting. So this first one is from Leviticus again. This is how the people of Israel were instructed to treat aliens, to treat refugees. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. So one way the Bible instructs us to deal with immigrants, with aliens, is to leave a portion of our harvest. Whether we're farmers and we have a real harvest, or whether we work in some other field and we have a harvest of finances, part of what we're instructed to do is to gather some of that and hold it aside for immigrants, for refugees. Later, Leviticus says, when an alien resides with you in your land, so those 855 displaced Afghans who will be coming to Ohio, what do we do with them? When an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. And then in Deuteronomy, every third year you shall bring out the full tithe of your produce for that year and store it in your towns. The Levites, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you, as well as the resident aliens, the orphans and the widows, they may come and eat their fill, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work that you undertake. So every third year, and that's an entire third of the harvest, is to be set aside for the aliens, the widows, and the orphans. And in the giving to those people, then the Lord may bless us in the work that we undertake. I think that's so interesting. Has anyone ever experienced that it's almost more of a blessing to you to bless someone else? By blessing others, we bless ourselves, don't we? He goes on to say a few verses later, then you, together with the Levites, the priests, and the aliens who reside among you, shall celebrate with all the bounty that the Lord your God has given to you and your house. We're instructed to celebrate with our friends who are immigrants and refugees. I mentioned before that Jesus himself was a refugee. Now, after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child and destroy him. And then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt. Can you imagine how different the world would be if Jesus had not been able to be a refugee, if he had not been able to escape to Egypt? We wouldn't even be sitting here today, would we? We wouldn't be Christians, we'd be something else. But of course, God always gets what God wants. So Jesus was able to escape. And I think that played into Jesus' own personal philosophy when it comes to immigrants, when it comes to aliens, because when he gave his Sermon on the Mount, which I'm sure you've all heard before, he said this. He said, come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. Do you know the next verse? I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And he was also famous for saying, you shall love your neighbor. You have heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love even your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Jesus knew what it was like to be treated as an enemy. And he knew what it was like to be a refugee. He saw it in his own people throughout their whole history, and he invites us to embrace that identity of being a refugee. And in doing so, to open our eyes to a new way of seeing others. Because really, we're not just citizens of the United States. I mean, I am a proud American. But I am not just an American. I am a citizen of heaven. You are a child of God. You are a citizen of heaven. We are all in this room. We have a citizenship that is greater than any country on earth. And that citizenship is our membership in this divine realm of heaven as children of an amazing God. And all of these refugees throughout the world are in that same camp. They are loved and cherished just as much as we are. And we, as God's hands and feet in the world, we're instructed to embrace them with love and to show them what it means to be a child of God and a citizen of heaven. So this isn't really an issue for left or right, or Democrat or Republican, or even American. This is a Christian issue. And Jesus was really clear on the issue of refugees. He said that we, as his people, are commanded to welcome the stranger. I mentioned earlier that you all were so hospitable and welcoming me in here, and I hope that you'll continue to be welcome. I haven't scared anybody too bad with this message, but you don't always see that in the church. And it's really interesting. I visited many churches, and one of my friends told me this story I'd like to share just really quickly, because I feel like a church should be the place where everyone is most welcome. And I felt that here. You guys nailed that. But I had a friend that visited a church a few weeks ago, and it was a church he hadn't been to before, and he wore a baseball cap into the church. And he didn't know whether that was a big deal or not to him. He was just covering up his messy hair because he, rolled out of bed. He had 5 kids to get ready, bring them all to church. And this is a church that only has 2 or 3 kids in the church, like many churches nowadays. It's an older population. And you would think, being a young family, they'd be welcomed in with wide open arms. And the very first thing that someone said to him is he sat down, they came up to him and they said, "Sir, we're going to need you to take off your hat. That's just really disrespectful." Is that really the first words that you'd want to be said to a visitor who came into your church? Now that's kind of a small thing, but to him it was a really big deal. He felt the very first feeling that he got walking into a church was not love, but was judgment. And there are times for judgment, but it's not at the door to the church. It's not our job to judge. It's our job to welcome and to love. And so I think it all starts, our response starts in the church. And you guys have already started in that response, is welcoming all of those who enter the door, embracing them through your words and your deeds as another child of God. But what else can we do beyond that as a church? Is there more that we could do? Well, one thing we can do is to do what I've been doing right now, and using my voice. Use your voice. We all have them. And we've been so afraid, for some reason, as a culture, to talk about issues that are maybe just a little bit political and a little bit divisive, but it's okay. It's okay to talk about it. So if you do feel that this is something that you care about, let other people know how you feel. Don't let hate win and prevent us from talking and keeping silent. It's okay to talk about this issue. And if you do feel that we should be more welcoming as a people, as a country, as a church, to foreigners, to refugees, and to immigrants, go ahead and talk about it. And if you don't feel that way, that's okay too. You also should be feeling free to talk about it. We should not be afraid to speak as Christians. I've been on many mission trips as a youth leader. Anyone else been on a mission trip? Very, very valuable, life-changing. I've seen so much happening in the lives of my students going on mission trips, and that's a very, very good thing. But I'll tell you what, you don't have to go on an actual mission trip to meet some refugees. Just Go out to the community and look around you. Start conversations with people you don't know. Hear their stories. Share your own story. We all have stories in our own lives of times when we felt oppressed, or we felt weak, or we felt unempowered. Share your own stories and listen to others. The Bible itself commands us to set aside some of our funds, some of our gifts, whether that be food or finances, to help others in need. And I'm sure probably all of you already do that. But maybe think about, is there some way that you can directly impact families in need that are escaping from oppression around the world and becoming refugees? Because one of the challenges is, as a refugee, you almost always have to leave everything behind. You literally come to the gate with nothing but the clothes on your back and your family, and that's it. And that's one of the hardest ways to start fresh. I mean, literally starting fresh, blank slate. And so there's a lot of need there. One of the really cool things that I found that you can do to support refugees is that you can go to a website. It's called rescue.org. So if you're the internet type, go to rescue.org. You can sign up to be a mentor or a tutor or to help somebody with their taxes. You can even open your home up to a refugee. One of the reasons that our numbers are so low is we don't have a lot of people who said, yeah, I'll take somebody in. If there's a family, if there's a child, if there's a widow who's looking for a place to stay, I'll take them in. So I just did that. I literally just a few days ago signed up to open my home. I haven't had anybody sign up yet. It's just been a few days. I'm hoping that I will. But if you have spare space in your home, maybe you have a room that someone could stay in for a few days or a few weeks. There are lots and lots of ways to help. One of the best ways that we as Christians have is that we can speak directly to God. That the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts connect directly with our Savior and our Redeemer, connect directly with the Creator of the entire universe. So that's one method I'd like to embrace right now, and that is through our prayer. So could we join together and pray? Lord, you know the sufferings of your people. Every single one of us in this room is your child. And sometimes as we go about our days, we forget what that means. We forget that you've placed us here with a purpose and a mission. But you've placed us on land that is not truly ours. We might have the deed to our home. We might live on a farm that's been passed down from generation to generation. We might live in an apartment that we've lived in for years. But no matter what, God, we are truly aliens in this land. You have told us that the land is yours, and we are but tenants of this space. And you have instructed us to be good stewards of the land and to love on our neighbors and even upon our enemies. So God, we ask now that you grant us the courage to be the kind of people that are welcoming to others, to recognize in their eyes that same desire for peace and hope that we have in ours. We ask that you open our eyes to new ways of helping others, that you quicken our tongues and remove any barriers that might be in the way so that we can more freely speak about what it means to be your people. Give us the strength in our hands and our feet to do your good work in the world. And create a lasting change within our hearts. Help us to feel your love, your compassion, your hope, and your peace inside of ourselves. Today and every day. For we pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and through the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.